Dear Future, welcome to the podcast that connects you with the pioneers of creative storytelling in the age of AI. I'm your host, Suki Mansour, and if you're new here, I'm an artist and recovering documentary filmmaker, currently leading artist programs and creative community at an AI lab. Today, I'm joined by someone who also works at the intersection of tech and artistry and uses technology to create with feeling. Henry Daubrez is a Belgian digital artist and filmmaker whose journey began with a Lord of the Rings DVD extra, a spark that carried him from a working-class childhood into 2 decades of shaping world-class digital experiences. His work, from the lyrical AI short Kitsune to the neon-soaked Electric Pink, blends painterly visuals with deeply human storytelling. After surviving kidney cancer and losing both parents to the disease, Henry's art has become a way of honoring resilience, especially through his Portraits of Cancer project. He's now the resident filmmaker and creative director at Google Labs, helping build flow and mentoring the next wave of AI storytellers. Henry, welcome to Dear Future.
This idea that everything's been done before can be challenged.
I've been dreaming of a computer like this my whole life.
It really made me think more about how our brains work.
It's not coming from anywhere else. It's only coming from us.
Dear Future.
Thank you. I also appreciate you did your homework. Like, you do know a lot of things about me already.
I tried to read a little.
That's good.
Well, it's so nice to have you on the show. I think where I usually try to start is at the very beginning, which is, what was your first experience with technology and artistry together?
When I was in elementary, I remember there was one computer for the entire class. I was born in 84, so we're speaking like early 90s. That was already like kind of a miracle. You had a computer in the class, and when you would be done with your homework, whatever you had to do, you could earn the right to go on the computer and play something called Logo. If you don't know if you heard of it, it's this kind of a small turtle, which basically was just a dot. And so you had to enter like a distance, an angle, and it was basically draw. So it's like, hey, I want to move forward like 20 and I want to turn 90 degrees. And so you had to do everything in degrees and in units. And then you could draw that way. So I think that's the first way I use the computer to create. Once again, like one of this generation, which Windows 95, and then playing with paint and doing like random stuff, and hopefully something would look like anything. That was terrible, but that was fun. So I'm coming indeed from a background where like technology wasn't really a thing. Where I came from was more like extremely working class. My family from my mom's side came to work in mines. My dad and his family worked in mines. So having a computer was not really something you would do. And then I think my dad won like a small check to the lottery when we were kids, like a few $1,000s. And instead of like taking anything which would be useful, I don't know, for whatever reason, he bought a computer. It was a Commodore 64. And one of my brothers, I'm the last one of 4, I was like, hey, do you think you can do something with this? And my brother was like, yeah, sure. Like, I can, try to figure it out. And so he started programming in BASIC. And that was kind of the start. And then we had computer at home forever after that. And I think that's how it started to be just normal for me to hang around technology and see how it could, evolve and create music and, websites and draw and whatnot. So,
I mean, I feel like what's so beautiful about the creative process, but even just the curiosity about technology, is it starts from one thing. And as a kid, you're just like, how does this thing work? I don't know. Will I get my hands on it and like figure out how this thing operates? But you did a very interesting thing where you moved, actually, rather than going right into computer science, which you studied, you actually moved into digital art. And I really love the story about you finding this Weta Digital featurette on the Lord of the Rings DVD. I want to hear a little bit more about how this moment shaped your trajectory from being a computer science student to being a digital artist and the rest of your artistic career.
So once again, we have 4 kids. I'm the youngest, like I'm 41, and my oldest brother like 58. So different generation. To them, like getting more education was the path to a better life. My dad went to work when he was 16, and my mom had kids when she was like 18, and their life was pretty much settled. And for them, like having more education was the one thing which was important. And as I was doing extremely well in the high school, they figured out like one of our kids has to do university. He has to do that. And so I had no idea what I wanted to do. Like I think a lot of teenagers getting out of high school and be like, what am I going to do? As a kid, you would have asked me, I would have wanted to become a comic book artist because it's such a culture of comic books in Belgium. My parents were actually quick to say like, no, no way, like you're never going to make a living out of this, and we want our kids to have a better life than we did. And I kind of put it in the back of my head, and so I figured out, you know what, I've been around computers for most of my life, so I'm going to do computer science at the uni. And so I did a year like this, not liking at all what I was doing. And it's funny, I was looking at the curriculum, and I was looking like 5 years ahead, and there was a 3D programming course. And that was really exciting me. It's like, oh, in 5 years, I will be able to do that course, which is like insane. And somewhere along the road, like I had extra exams to do like in September and somewhere during summer. I did watch the bonus DVD.
How old were you?
I think I was still 18, I think. But I already had a year behind me because I
On
started
the
college in
cusp.
17. Yeah,
And what's
exactly.
different, right, in Europe is that like you have to decide your kind of degree when you're like
Yeah.
17 or 16, which is very different than in the States.
Yeah, that's something I'm still discovering living in the US. That definitely, like, you have to choose something. It's not like, I'm going to like take a few years and then major in some things. No, like now I'm going to study to be a doctor or to be whatever, a biologist, which is scary. Like, mostly you have no idea. Also, because the way it's organized in the high school is really, you learn a bit of everything. So you don't choose already. You're given with everything. You do as much math and whatever, French back then, and science. So, long story short, I was 18 at the time. What's interesting is Lord of the Rings was a big part of my upbringing. The book that was like universal, I thought was great, and the book itself, like the way it was detailed, and that's something which really carried up to that point. And then I discovered Weta Digital, which is basically a FX studio for the Lord of the Rings. I don't know, it was the instant like, oh, I didn't know you could do this on a computer, and that was really pushing the limits of everything. And that was really exciting to me that you could actually do something creative on a computer. It didn't mean like I'm going to be a computer scientist. It didn't mean like I'm going to be an illustrator. It's somewhere in between. I remember like flying down the stairs that day, telling my parents, look, I know what I want to do. And I was really lucky because school just opened like a year prior, a college in my hometown. Like they were really starting, like teachers like learn anything, they didn't study, they just, grabbed the book and started learning 2DS Max. And my parents were cool enough to say, if you put 100% into that, like why not go for that? And I got lucky, like really, they were like, really supportive, knowing that it was really important for them to have, one of their kids doing university. And they were extremely easy to say, as long as you work your ass off, like we're fine.
But like now, we'll fast forward a little bit. You've worn so many hats. Like reading through your bio, it's like designer, developer, CEO, creative director. Now you're a resident AI filmmaker, which is a job that just didn't exist, right, when we first started. Which of these roles would you say most influences how you think about generative AI tools today and how you see yourself?
I'm going to start by the end. So I would consider myself as a art director. Even growing up, I always have been obsessed by the notion of beauty and by aesthetics, but also standing out. I like how a direction in aesthetics and design can create entirely new path, like something which hasn't been done before. And I think there's some magic in there, at least for me. As you said, right? I wore many hats, and storytelling is one of the most important things. But even when I build a story, I think the way it's going to feel visually is really important to me. So my career has been, I spent 20 years like doing a lot of different things, and started at the very bottom of the ladder until being CEO of a company, getting acquired, and so on and so forth. And I think each position taught me something different. For example, when we started at the agency, there was a very small shop initially. We were doing websites for a couple of $1,000 and ended up doing, project for 8 figures. It was all about not having much and maximizing the value.
Being scrappy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really important to be able to see, which is, people always say, like, you have to think out of the box. It's that, right? Like, you have a shitty budget, but you try to make it a project which is going to be award winning because you find angles or like whatever the industry of the client is not really interesting, but then you find another direction which is going to make it something else, which makes it fun for you to work on it versus like, oh, I'm going to, suffer
Right.
for like the next 6 months. So after this moment, I would say that my entire career was spent doing different things and wearing different hats. So I was designing and doing front-end development and producing and doing sales with the clients. And it's been interesting to wear all those hats because today working with AI is exactly what I'm doing. I'm constantly switching, and that's maybe as part of my ADHD brain, but it does feel good. It scratches that itch to always do different things and to have like 60 tabs open and, like generate something and then edit at the same time and whatever, doing some design. And the last thing, which I think was really relevant, is being a creative director. I always have been really hands-on. I never believed in creative who are saying, I'm a director, but then last time they worked hands-on a project for like 10 years ago. Like, I don't believe in directing people if yourself doesn't have that touch. And so I always have been working in every project, but as we grew as a company as well, we started having obviously more team members. And I think being able to curate the work of others is to me important. And that came in handy when AI started to like generalize, started to become more of a thing. I love this idea that I was still very hands-on enough ways to modify, arrange, and whatever. But I was also actively deciding what I wanted to keep. Like some people are saying, like, oh no, you just prompt and get something. Yeah, I can get like 600 different versions of something.
Like
but
a
which one is
million different
good?
shots.
Exactly. And so what's good, what's worth keeping, and that's interesting.
Have you ever seen Ira Glass's The Gap video?
No, I don't think so.
There was a video, I think, that like This American Life, or maybe it was Radiolab that put it out. And I remember I was working in New York trying to figure out my life as a young person in the professional working world. And somebody sent me this video called The Gap. And it was all about Ira Glass's perspective. As a creative, you see work out in the world and you see the value of it. It moves you, it shakes something up in you. And then you try to make it and you see this massive gap between the thing that you have in your brain that you want to create, this feeling you want to incite in somebody else, and then the thing you've actually made, which is dog shit. And you're like, how do I get from here to there? And so much of creative work is not about making that thing all the time. It's actually putting in the hours to continue to sort of close that gap. And what's so interesting about sort of the generative AI landscape, which you just touched on, is that it is much more a process of singling out the things you don't like because it is so easy to create. There's really not a lot of challenge to create something brand new. You have the assistance and the slicking of the runway of all of these tools, putting your hand on the paper and drawing for you so that you can start with an idea. But then where do you add the grit? Where do you add complexity? Where do you say, no, now I'm going to pick up the pen and create something myself? And I'm curious for you, as now you have digested and alchemized all of these roles into this new role, what for you is your creative practice? What does that look like today actively as you are making with these tools? And how is it different than your previous creative practice?
My former creative practice has been always evolving. I started on a medium I genuinely hated, which was the web. I started on the end of the Flash days, and Flash, for anyone who knows Flash, was still fun, and I love working on the medium, and then it got killed when Apple decided not to support it on iPad. But after that, it was like, oh, I'm working on such a non-creative medium. And I spent all those years seeing technology move forward and trying to introduce a sense of storytelling everything I was doing. The more the tech was moving forward and the more we were getting real-time 3D for the web and doing real experiential work, and the more exciting it got. I think switching to film today, it's kind of the thing I've been waiting for. As a kid, I would have loved to know that today I'm in some capacity creating film content, because I didn't think it was in the cards, and I don't think because of my bringing, because of the choices I've made, because of the reality of things, that was something which would happen. And so now being able to translate from getting a medium, which initially was a lot of the web, and then I started doing with the studio interactive installations, so physical work, which was extremely rewarding. And now moving to film is to me just, kind of the logical evolution of that. Today, my creative practice is the art of being flexible, the art of adapting. It's exhausting. It's also exciting, but anyone who's in this space is going to tell you that every 2 days you have something new, and you have to decide. Like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I could still try everything. Now I have to actively decide: am I going to try this tool, or I'm going to move and wait until the next time? I think it's all about managing expectations on one side. So let's say you have a project in your head, you have a film. What I have in mind, is it realistic? Can I actually do this in the best possible version of it today with the tooling? I notice a lot of people using AI are actually trying to push things too far, where the tech is not ready yet and it doesn't work. And they don't want to accept that it doesn't work. It's not right. So I think it's more a matter of indeed adapting and pacing yourself. Like, oh, I have that story and it feels like the technology is ready. So you mentioned Kitsune before, the film I released in January of this year, which definitely put me on the map for a lot of people. This happened at that very specific moment and not a year before, just because I was just looking each video model get out and get released and be like, it's not ready yet. Like I would spend 20 minutes on, back then it was Runway, I think the only one, in at least for most of 2024. And it wasn't reactive. It wasn't getting where it should be. And I think it's just a matter of feeling when it's time. Like, okay, now I can use this, I can do that.
Kind of like surrendering.
I mean, you have to. I know that's the first point people are criticizing. Like, oh, you're not deciding, let the machine decide for you, you're not an artist. Like, I'm pro-human. It's like, I'm still deciding what I want to say. Even if I was putting just words in a box, I'm still deciding which words I'm going to put in that box. I'm choosing which medium I'm going to get, which output I'm going to keep. And in the way I present it to you, there's a lot of conscious choices, but you surrender to the fact that it might not be exactly what you would have done, not what you have in mind. I love this idea of being surprised sometimes. I mean, that's not exactly what I wanted, but it's even better. And then you do your own soup with it.
And so, just on this point, I'm very curious. You've moved from just making this art experimentally on your own in your own company to now being a mentor for a lot of up and coming filmmakers and really leaning into like a more educational role, creative direction role still, but very much mentoring the next generation of creative storytellers. What have you learned about yourself and about where we're at right now from that experience?
So I would say what I explained just before is part of this. So I'm mentoring for something called Flow Sessions, which is kind of an artist residency, which is being run within the labs. You have indeed artists who are coming together for a few weeks and try to build content. And something which I have seen less this time, the current cohort, but the first one, people are too ambitious. They want to do too much in such a short amount of time. And I do believe the tech is amazing, but it still takes a lot of hand holding to get to something with a certain quality. And I think that's something which has been important. But I think mostly, I mean, I haven't been spending the last 2 decades doing film, right? So I wouldn't say I'm the best person to tell you how to write a scenario or how to perfectly handle your photography. The one thing I trust is one, my taste, good or bad. That's the one thing which carried me until today. So I give it enough credit to trust it. And the second thing is those 20 years doing something else. I think whether you do AI or like you're an illustrator or like a 3D artist, I think having a creative occupation, whether it's a job or a hobby, it's same, right? Like the mindset is just move to a different tool and then you just adapt, but it's just the way you think.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think in some ways, wherever you go, there you are. Like there's a continuation of kind of your philosophy, whether you're orienting towards your craft or you're orienting towards labor and however capitalism defines your value. And so I think what's really great is just hearing how there's a kind of resilience and adaptability and a way of looking at the world as like, oh, here's a new challenge. How do we orient towards this new challenge in a way that feels more realistic? And I am curious about some of your adventures or escapades in the fine art world, because there's not many artists who can say that they've sold something, much less an AI created piece. I just came from Art Basel, getting to see a lot of different artists in the digital art space. And I'm very curious about your experience doing that and if it changed anything about how you feel about AI. I mean, there's a lot of things to like get into. We can talk about rarity or provenance or like the original versus a remix, but anything that comes to mind around your experience.
So to give context about that, I always been creating, and I think at some point the agency took so much time that I didn't have this energy to keep on working on personal projects. I think when AI, so 4 years ago, I started with VQ again, and that was my coding. Like I had new technology, and it felt great to have this spark to do my own things, which I lost like a while ago. And so those 4 years were interesting because I got to discover kind of a new world, and both actually two new worlds at the same time, which was both satisfying and terrible at the same time. So 4 years ago when I started, crypto started to explode and NFTs. And I was curious. I had no idea what I was working on to create a wallet and how cryptocurrencies were working. But what's interesting to me is to see that art was becoming part of a currency too. And that as an artist, I started selling art on blockchain called Tezos, which was extremely cheap. I mean, it should be cheap, right? Like $3, I think, a unit. Like a Bitcoin is like, I don't know how much it is right now, but like 100,000. And so it felt like suddenly I could start selling my art without having to go through the extent of like printing stuff. And it was really like getting to meet suddenly like a community of people who were like into art, but so definitely into money and speculating on the work which is being sold. And so I spent 4 years in that space before switching to film. I still have ties in the space with people who were actually amazing. And I was glad to be part of some of this, but at the same time, it felt exhausting mentally to apply constantly to whatever exhibits, around the world and then send your work and then discuss the thing and then produce material and whatever. But I would say though that during that time, I started making new friends and new connections. And the thing I value the most is the people you meet, right? The real connections you start building with people who have totally different ways of life. And like you, thanks to AI, found back kind of a calling, something that they left behind. Most of them were creative to some extent in their day job, but a lot of them just gave up on that dream like a long time ago and then suddenly discovered that they could do something. But so yeah, so the beast came because actually my friend who's running a shop called Blockhead Labs, they're doing like skyboxes for video games using AI, reached out saying, hey, I've got the opportunity on Sotheby's. We're making a puzzle with like a treasure hunt thing behind on the blockchain, but I would love you to do some art and to create the piece itself. And so I ended up in this experience with her. It was 5 different pieces, and each of them was using indeed AI, but also traditional Photoshop and with like some more like collage and whatnot. But I think it's more thanks to the people you meet and the connections you make that those things happen.
Yeah. It's always that way. You think that these worlds are like, oh, once I get to this level of quality of my work, I'm going to be shown in a museum. And it's like, no, it's because you went to a party and met that person and they liked a joke you made. And then they decided to text you the project that came into their inbox. And like, there it is. It's so wild.
100%. It's sad in a way, though, right?
But it's also great. It's also great because it's a people thing, right? It's like all of these connections and all of these opportunities. It really is a mixture of luck and preparation. And if you had met those people without having done the work, without being in a creative practice and flow where you're really ambitiously creating work, then it just wouldn't really make sense or you wouldn't deliver. But it is wild when the opportunities come out of the box in a way you never expected, which is very much my situation as well. So I totally understand, and it is endlessly hilarious to me. And I want to kind of dive a little bit into your work before we get into some more personal stuff. But some of the projects that you've made, I think, are really interesting because they're very grounded emotionally. Like one deeply grounded in story, Kitsune. Is it Kitsune or Kitsune?
I think it's Kitsune. It's a Japanese word which means fox, basically, and I think it's pronounced Kitsune. But don't quote me on that, I may be wrong.
So Kitsune, I think, is so beautiful because it's this very like nonverbal, poetic exploration of this fox going through these landscapes, these really dreamy, beautiful landscapes, following the star, which I won't ruin it for anyone. It turns out to be a very special surprise. Highly recommend you go watch it. For me, it was like a very inspiring way to think about animation, which is traditionally very hard to break into. As someone who learned like hand-drawn animation in college, I'm just like, I never want to do that ever again. But I learned how to do it, and I'm very proud of myself for learning how to do it. But when you finish up with all of these frames and you realize you only have 3 seconds, it is like downright demoralizing. And so for you to have made this long film about this fox exploring this environment, I'm just very curious just with that, what was the biggest surprise in trying to direct an animated AI film? And what were the takeaways that you got from that, especially since that was like a breakout moment for you?
Maybe one step before to understand the mindset I had when I started this. But so 9 months prior to that, I got commissioned, and so by extension, my team at the agency before I left, by Coca-Cola to create a film for the Runway Film Festival. And the thing is, there was no way to create something with a good timing at the time, just using the Reader tool out of the box. And so what we did back then is that we built a series of workflows using Config UI, which is this kind of a node-based interface where you connect boxes, and each box has a rule, like a factory chain. And so we had an illustrator was basically creating, like, as you mentioned, right, like frame by frame animation, so that we could control the timing and have this film, and then use AI to actually do more like a rendering engine, like just transforming into the aesthetic you want to have. And that was really interesting and really rewarding. But so it took a team of like 10 people and worked out, and we had this thing we were proud of. But then I spent like the rest of the year, trying everything on the market to see if there was a different way to do it. And then VO2 came out, in through all those connections, all those years, like someone said, hey, if you want an access, we could give you an early access. And I'm not sure they didn't regret after that, because I think I burned for like a ton of money in credits at the time. It was the limit.
It's what it's for.
I mean, prices went down in between, but at the time it was pretty grand of credit. But so I worked on this film. And so why 2D animation? And certainly because I don't watch much animation these days. But growing up, I did a lot. And the one thing which always struck me is that I remember that Disney Animation closed their 2D studio at some point to do 3D films. A few years afterwards, they reopened quickly for, I think it was The Princess and the Frog. And then they reclosed again afterwards. Like, there was no public anymore for 2D animation. It's costly, it takes time, but some people want to see something else. And it always has been kind of my unicorn. Like, I have a few go-to when I'm using AI. It's a bit weird. It's like kind of on a CD thing, but using image model, I'm going to try everything which is like an impasto painting. I love this idea of to scream with that, but I love the imperfection of the medium, but I love the idea of bringing a digital way, which doesn't make sense, right? You cannot touch the screen and be like, oh, yeah, it's impasto. But I love to create doubt in what you watch and wonder, what am I actually watching? Is it a picture of an actual painting, or is it a painting which is digitally created? Same for Kitsune. I love the idea of trying to create a 2D animation film which feels close enough to the real deal that people wonder how it's done, but also maybe forget the medium. They're like, I don't care how it's done. I just want, to see the story come together. And VO2 kind of gave me that model, which was strong enough in understanding of my language. So that was definitely text to video, which means you can name it a request for that. That's prompting. So I had to prompt everything. I was using, back then it was ChatGPT to help me create a structure for the prompt so that I could after basically repopulate all of that and build my entire story. But as you mentioned, I think the magic to me was that in 4, 5, 6 weeks, I don't remember how long it took of my Christmas break and like a bit of the start of the year, I had created this 5 minutes film, which felt to me good enough to put it out there, and with a narrative and arcs and an aesthetic which reminded me of the cartoons I grew up with in the 80s and early 90s. And that's the magic to me to AI. Like, you're not limited. It kind of breaks the barrier of time, not 100%. Obviously, like, the faster, cheaper narrative is already coming pretty strongly. But as an indie filmmaker, I think it's pretty amazing that I could get a vision and handle pretty much every single part because I'm helped, right, along the way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So you make this film, you're able to pull from it a style that is so like the versions that you've been trying to accomplish as a digital artist, the sort of like painterly handmade feeling, and you're able to accomplish this in a really crazy way. And then you came back with a double feature. They said you couldn't do it, but you did it. So you come back with Electric Pink, and you also feature that. It's like a premiere at the Google's conference. First of all, what was that like? And how did it change your perception of what will be possible with AI video in the next few years?
So Electric Pink was indeed a commission I got from Google. So Kitsune got out. I got like 50-50 hate love, like pretty much every single time. But the love part was like executive and studios reaching out and Google reaching out saying, hey, cool, use our tool. But which to me is still pretty crazy because I think it's the same for any kind of model company. Like, tech companies are putting models out there, but they're never sure what they can do. They have an idea, but they need people like myself and like a lot of others to actually try things and then say, hey, we can do that. And so they reach out saying, oh, cool, you made that film. We have no idea how did you, with our tool, how did you get that? And so that got me on their radar. And so at some point, we kept on discussing. At some point, they suggested, hey, we're doing something with two other filmmakers for the Google I/O, and you have this right to create a film with us. I was still employed by a company at the time, so said, you know what, go with my company, and then they're going to bill you, and then I'm just happy to do the work. And the good news is that I had full freedom, creative freedom, which I, in a weird world, I still have today, but they let me do my thing. And so two things, the idea of Electric Pink was to leverage what was available at the time, which was VO2, but image to video, so I could create each frame individually and then animate it, which, coming back to what I said before, as an art director, to me feels more natural. Like, I see what I have. It's like a storyboard, which is nearly ready, and then you just, quote unquote, have to make it move and edit a lot. But so this film was exciting to build because I felt like I had this, maybe I felt too much, but this kind of a responsibility to inspire indie filmmakers. I get a chance to have something truly visible. I don't like most of the AI films I watch because I have the feeling it's always the same thing. It's always the same science fiction. It's always, even the scenarios are a bit different. It's like the same genres. And I get it, right? Like, everyone wants to do things which inspire them. And mostly if you dig enough, it's when they were kids. And I wanted to have some heart in it. Like, that's what I was doing at the studio before doing all of that. It was always designed for emotion, get people to feel something. That's the only thing which is going to matter. Like, on any medium, I think there's so much noise, there's so much content produced every day. The only way to stand out is to get them to react strongly. And so Electric Pink is basically a story of my upbringing, explaining what I mentioned before. Like, I grew up, my parents would, give me material to draw and to paint and whatever. But then I'm kind of like suddenly in this position where I'm doing film. I'm not a filmmaker, and everything I am learning a lot of stuff, and it's difficult to doubt yourself. But at the same time, everyone has a complex universe. If you're honest with yourself and you indeed you don't try to recreate science fiction that you have seen again and again, you say, as a person, this is who I am and I want to share it with you. How did it translate? And so the entire film is around that, explaining that experience, those conflicts. It got released indeed for the Google I/O. Funnily enough, it was tied to the release of Google Flow, the tool which is now available, and VO free, except I didn't have access to neither to either Google Flow or VO free to make the film. But
That's
I think
amazing.
like 3 days before. Yeah, so I was like, okay, 3 days before the deadline is like, hey, by the way, we have this and we're going to announce it. It's cool. I would have wanted to have it before. But yeah, so it got released. I was lucky enough to be invited at the I/O, which was a pretty surreal experience, like being in this kind of stadium in San Francisco and see the keynote unfold and all of that, which is more of a bonus. But the fun part, though, is that it to me the most impressive for my experience. So over years, I gave a lot of conferences in a lot of different places, and I'm used to the exercise. But a week before, the person who was running the program asked me, hey, by the way, would you mind staying one more day? There's something called the demo day, which is basically our internal I/O, like for all the employees of Google. And we would like you to come on stage and do a demo with Thomas, who's working with you. And I thought it was a small thing. Like, we would go in a room, it would be like a hackathon, and, like there's 60 chairs, and then there's a stupid stool on the front. And actually, it was in the same place. I didn't know. So it's this huge stadium with like this very small stage. Like, okay, morning, you go there and you have like 3 minutes and you have to do this and that. Like, that That was to me like the
So
most
stressful.
surreal. Yeah, I know, super surreal, and that was amazing. That was fun.
Well, I just want to say I'm very happy for you that you've been able to kind of scale so many different worlds. It's just so hard to like map the trajectory of our lives until we look back and it's like, look at that straight line. But actually mapping it from the future is just so unexpected. So congratulations on that. That's really amazing. And I do think that this Portraits of Cancer is a really amazing project. And I think it's a very personal project. And I'd love to talk about it just for a moment if you're open to it. You lived with sort of these narratives around cancer for your whole life, first with your parents going through that, and then your own experience. I'm very curious how those experiences shaped this creative project and what you really want people to take away from the project.
Basically, when I was early preteen, teen, my mom got cancer. First it was the lungs, and then she got surgery. She got it better, and then she basically spent like 8, 9 years of her life fighting cancer, went to her brain, and she eventually died from a brain cancer, which got generalized. And prior to that, my grandfather died from cancer. Two of her brothers. It's been a topic. It's 7 years ago. My dad also got cancer, and then did whatever he could, and then passed or so on the back of 2020. It was during COVID. We speak about it in an extremely distant way because it's been always in the family. I remember as a kid it was difficult. Like I remember being woken up by my mom crying because she was washing her hair and she was losing her hair, and it was really important to her. And then that day my dad shaved her hair fully. Those moments, I don't remember a lot of her being sick. It's very specific moments which to me were like more heavy. But then by the time time to my dad, I think we had this culture in the family as well as so not to give pity or whatever. Both my parents were extremely proud and were like, I'll do my maximum, but then if it just doesn't work out, then fair enough. It's been interesting as a topic. And so a few years ago, a company reached out the agency saying, hey, we have this project called Portraits of Cancer. We are working with cancer patients, caretakers, people in research, and we would like you to actually leverage AI to try to create illustrations to tell their story. So you're going to ask me, why don't you use real illustrators? Yeah, of course you could. The point of this is that it's really a co-creation process, and that the point of AI to me is to explore different worlds, right? You can have an infinity of aesthetics, an infinity of ways to represent things, and that's what I want to embrace. So I started this project last year, I think.
But before you started the project, you had your own experience with cancer, right?
I went to the hospital here in the US for what I thought was a kidney stone, and definitely was a kidney stone, which actually might have saved me in the end. They checked to the CT scan, and there's something on the other side, like most likely a cyst, but just come back. I remember going to the hospital, super chill. My wife told me like, you want me to come? I know, fine, like it's a cyst, I'm just going to come. He's like, so I sit down, and like the urologist like, okay, we need to look. That's a cancer. I'm 100% sure. And it was like literally 5 minutes. Like those are the options. We can we move it that way, that way, that way. All right, think about it. Bye. And then he left, and I was like, fuck, I have so many questions. But I was lucky because it was early, so that's why I'm saying this kidney stone might have saved me. So not hydrating might have saved me at the time, but I'm not calling myself a cancer survivor. I think it's actually a disrespect for people who are actual cancer survivors. They found a tumor. I went to the hospital like 2 months after. They removed it with surgery. Recovery was shit, and then I was back again, right? And I didn't have to do chemo. I didn't have to do a lot of the VR process. So I'm super grateful, but also I don't call myself a cancer survivor for that. For that project, I do meet a lot of actual people who have been fighting odds in so many different ways, and sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't work. So the way it works, I am conducting interviews with a producer who's helping me like basically keep track of all of that. We're conducting interviews, recording those interviews with those patients. Some of them are in remission, some of them are still actively sick, some of them were actively dying when we met, and then they share their story. Like we exchange. Sometimes it's extremely easy for both. Sometimes it's extremely emotional for one of us. Some are just telling their side of the story, are crying during the session, and that's fine, and that's a safe space. But the idea is that based on those interviews, I'm going back on my side and I'm using Gen AI to create concepts which are going to be related to that process and that feedback, and then come back to them, show them the different options they have. Like someone was in the Navy for like their entire life, and I'm going to do something about like either the water or the ocean, like the Navy itself. So it's really trying to find concepts which are going to summarize or like to get to feel them seen, and then we refine. But the point of AI is indeed the first call we have. It's like at least 16 different things. Like it's 4 by concept and 4 different concepts, and then you can say, oh, I love this, but I don't love that, and then we kind of remix things together until we have like this final portraits. There's one, for example, especially I remember Jonathan. When I met him, him. He had, I think it was stomach cancer. He knew he was going to be gone in a few months. He was so calm. He lost everything he loved. He loved to cook. He could barely eat anymore. And he was a drill instructor in the Navy. And he used to be this kind of a super muscle man and was extremely skinny. And I think especially for all of them, but like I remember Jonathan being extremely grateful of that process. He knew it was getting to the end for him, but he had this, this way to tell the story and to explain what was happening and to be able to share that and to have something to look forward to. We had some of the calls when he was at the hospital getting treatment. So that's an ongoing project. Initially, it was only curated now by the biotech company called Arcus, which is doing research to find treatments for cancer. But now you have people who are actually reaching out directly to Arcus to ask to be part of the project. So we might have to scale up next year and find out how to make it happen, which is great that people are interested in this and want to be a part of it.
That's so beautiful. What an amazing way to also give back to the world in a way that it just feels personal. You've gone through it with your parents, you know what that's like, and to be able to give back to that community. We even have friends who have gone through cancer diagnosis. We, spent time with a friend of ours who was going through chemo and been through it a few times actually, which is it's so crazy at our age that this is happening more and more, but it can really be anyone. And so it's very warming and grounding for me to hear that that's something that you're doing to give back to the community. So thanks for doing that.
Appreciate it. It's a journey. I think I'm learning a lot from those people I meet over time.
Yeah. Well, we're sort of at the end of our time here. And while I would love to continue speaking to you forever, I'm sure that you have many other things to do and a family to spend time with. So I just want to say, sort of at the end here, if there's anything you want to share as a last wish, a last invitation, anything that you would want to share with anyone, this is your moment.
I would encourage anyone to keep on experimenting. I think a lot are being discouraged by, obviously, there's a lot of scrutiny around AI, and I'm not saying I'm 100% for, like I think it's a moving firm, it's complicated, and there's definitely a lot of implications. But I think it's sad when some people let go of energy they have to create because they think that they're like just killing puppies by using AI, and that's how a lot are being pointed at. It's like, oh, you're such a terrible person, and it becomes personal really fast, and I understand why. Even for people who are against it, it's personal. I think it shouldn't discourage you from doing something which makes you feel better about yourself. If using whatever Suno to create music makes you feel better, fucking do it. Like stop being annoyed and being ashamed because artists or musicians say that it's not music. Who cares? Like if it makes you feel good, just fucking do it. Like enjoy for yourself, listen to your own music. I think that's the thing. Like it's a weird divided moment, and that's normal, but I think it's important to embrace the little things if it makes you feel better about yourself.
That's great. A very YOLO philosophy. I'm into it.
Yeah.
Just to finish off, we always do this with our guests. Dear Future is the beginning of a letter, right? But we need to end it. And so I would ask you if you were to complete the sentence, Dear Future, what would that sentence be?
Dear Future, get your shit together.
Oh, this is a spicy one. That is a great way to end the show. I love it. I'm so into it. No edits, no rewrites. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. So appreciate you joining us. And just for anyone who is listening, this is an opportunity for us to chat with people at the bleeding edge of what is possible in this world. And so I hope that you are inspired by Henry's work. I hope that it motivates you to go look at his work. Please go see Kitsune and Electric Pink. Please check out Portraits of Cancer. And also, please send in questions. This is a show that we sort of come up with. It's very grassroots, and we love connecting with people on the ground. So if you know of anyone who is a pioneer in this space and that we should interview, please let us know. And we hope that you follow along and listen to some of the other interviews we have with other folks in the space. Until next time, we hope that you stay creative and stay generating. This is us at Dear Future, signing off.
Dear Future.